Okay, so here's the second part of the narration lecture for your narration essay, and we're just continuing on with the details necessary for this. So, one of the things you need to be certain of is determining what point of view you're going to use in your narration. So, because it's an informal essay, this is the one place where you can use I. You still may not use you. Do not be using you in your narration. There's no room for you in any form of writing at all. All right? Unless it's a process essay where you're explaining to somebody how to do something. So decide, are you going to do it in first person, the I, or are you going to do it in third person, he, she? All right. The thing is, once you determine that, stick with it. It's very easy to accidentally move from one to the other. So don't let that happen. That can end up causing you to lose a fair amount of points on the essay. If you're going to use dialogue, use it sparingly and when appropriate. I've had people turn in 20-page narration essays because they use so much dialogue. It just kept expanding and expanding out. Dialogue takes up a lot of room on the page, so you want to use it only when you really need. Now, the other issue is you want to make sure you've organized this properly. You're probably the easiest, and what I would suggest is to just do it chronological. Go from the beginning to the middle to the end. You don't have to, but when you first learning how to write this type of essay or learning how to write short stories, it's easiest to just stick with the simplest. You can use flashback now to where something triggers something and the person flashes back on something, uh, like a scent, like somebody smells something and it makes them reminds them of their grandmother, and that flashes them back to some story about their grandmother. All right, and you can also start in the middle of the story and use backstory. So with Cinderella, it kind of starts in the middle because the father's died. Now she's living with just the wicked stepmother and the wicked stepsisters, and so we don't see that happen in the story. The story begins, and then we're told about that. It's used as backstory. So that's how backstory works. No matter what you do, though, make sure the reader can follow it. Uh, Christopher Nolan, who did the Dark Knight series of movies, genius, the director. His first movie was called Memento, where a guy wakes up and he's tattooed with words and phrases, and it turns out he has no short-term memory, so he can't remember what happened the day before. He's got long-term, but not short-term. And it turns out his girlfriend's been murdered. The police think he did it, and so he's running from the police and trying to discover who the actual murderer is. And when he discovers a new piece of evidence, he has it tattooed on his body, so that every morning he wakes up, he has to read all his tattoos to remember where he is. The first 20 minutes of that movie probably lost half its audience. People just turned it off or they walked out because it was too confusing. People couldn't follow what was going on. You want to make sure that your reader can follow what's going on with your story. And always stay clear of unnecessary detail. I had a woman once write a 10-page narration on her winning, her cheerleading team winning state championships in her senior year. But she started the narration trying out for cheerleading in her freshman year, and then went to her sophomore year, then went to her junior year, then went to her senior year. I watched the people who peer edit her fall asleep as she's reading that essay. So stay away from unnecessary detail. This is very important. Decide, are you writing in the present tense, things are happening now, or are you writing in the past tense, everything's already happened? Determine that and stick with it. Do not go back and forth. All right. Now, if you're in the past tense, you can use what's known as the verbal gerund to give a sense of the present. So that's where a verb is being used as some other form of grammatical unit, not as a verb. So here, Jack turned the corner and entered the hallway. So that's past tense. He found himself, past tense, facing a small army of rats. Well, the verb in this sentence is found. Facing a small army of rats is an adverbial phrase telling how he found himself. right? But it gives you a sense of being in the present. Now, be careful when you use this. I think this is why people all of a sudden they're right in the past tense and then they all of a sudden are in the present tense because they use something like this and forget that they were in the past. I think also what happens is when you use dialogue, people always speak in the present tense. You can say he said, but what he says is actually in the present tense, and I think that throws people off. So be careful. Now, when you're writing it, just determine what the actual subject's going to be and what you're actually writing about. Make sure whatever you're writing about is worth telling. Then decide everything that you need and everything you don't need. Make sure you know your conflict. Who's your main character? What does your main character want? And what is keeping your main character from getting what he or she wants? And have an intro that sets the stage. Place your reader in a situation that the reader understands what's going on. All right, and then always wrap it up. Conclude effectively. Have a resolution. Uh, Now, don't do what I did on my summer vacation. That will get you a very bad grade on this paper. But you can write about something that actually happened to you, if you wish. I had a student write about going out duck hunting at like 3 o'clock in the morning, rode out into the middle of a lake with a friend of his. It was a shallow lake. It wasn't very deep, but they were quite a ways out in the center of this lake, and the boat sprung a leak and it sank. So they're sitting in freezing cold water at 3 a.m. In the morning, 3 a.m. It's dark, there's nobody around them, and they're going to die of hypothermia before they get to the shore. That's conflict. You don't want to die, but you can't save yourself because you can't walk fast enough before you die to get to the shore. All right. And that's an actual event that happened to him. So you can write about actual events. You can write about an actual event and then weave some fiction into it, or you can write an entirely fictitious story. It doesn't matter to me. My concern is that there's conflict and there's a plot. Make sure you have that. All right. Hopefully that wraps it up. The assignment sheet will be in this week's module. If you have any questions, be sure to email me. I'll answer everything I can.